love was physics, and I went to university, was studying physics, and slowly it began to dawn on me that however much physics I studied, it was never going to satisfy this whole question that kept bubbling up: is why is there mind? Why is there consciousness in the universe? And so I went off to India to study meditation with teachers there, and that was really a turning point for me, I think. Two things happened. One, I realized there was something to spirituality. I'd completely rejected religion as a kid. It was just a load of weird mumbo jumbo, completely rejected it. And I also saw that behind just about every problem we had in the world, from big environmental problems to personal problems, social problems, there was this issue of human consciousness, human ego, the self. And so my life, I came back from India just wanting to do whatever I could to help people explore themselves, to wake up, to become better human beings, more conscious human beings, because that seems to me the most important thing in the world today that we can be doing.
As a young man, I wanted to be a doctor, and I went off to college. I was going to study medicine, but after a couple of years studying medicine in college, I then went to Paris because I wanted to get perspective on my life. And the war in Vietnam was happening then. It was a time of great conflict, of student riots, and in that context, I shifted from an interest in physical healing to social healing. And my life has never been the same.
Welcome to Pete and Duane's Window. This is a series of programs in which we look at humanity and the times we're passing through, and really looking at some of the bigger questions like who are we, where are we going, what's happening now. The sort of questions that we're fascinated, Duane and I, by the big questions, and so this is what we're going to be looking at. And today the question we want to look at is the world today, the world in transition, because it's clear there's a lot of forces pushing us: climate change, energy shortages, population. And we want to look at what are these trends, where are they taking us, how serious are they getting, and what should we be doing about them? Now, Duane, I know for a start you've worked on a presidential commission on America, and you worked on a future tank looking at these long-term things.
Right.
What do you see as the critical things that are happening?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to acknowledge this is a time of profound change that we're looking at. And I know from our conversations that this is really difficult. It's troubling to look deeply at humanity's future, because I think we're in a time of just absolutely unprecedented change. Never in the human species, never in our entire history have we been asked as an entire species, as an entire world, to come together and respond to the kind of challenges that we face. So the very first thing I want to acknowledge is to the viewers, to ourselves, how difficult it is actually to grapple and to get inside and reach down and look at these challenges that we face.
Yeah. So I think in a way, it's overwhelming for us. And we like to sort of stay in our cozy, comfortable mode of consciousness, how, everything's going to be fine. And when we're faced with, some of it's devastating, some of the information.
Indeed.
And it's so easy, I think, to move into what psychologists call denial.
Yes.
It's like we pretend it isn't happening.
Right.
It's so uncomfortable, we don't want to know about it.
Yes.
And we'd rather not consider it.
That's right. And then to easily then move into despair, to say, well, this is so difficult that I just can't look at it for any length of time, move into despair. And what we want to do today is kind of open up the window between denial on the one hand, despair on the other, and just kind of look at what's happening to us, recognizing there's a good measure of despair in there in how we both feel about the human future.
Yeah. So in this program, we need to be prepared for some pretty negative, maybe horrifying facts.
Yeah, some very difficult.
Yeah.
So let's start looking at this, and I'd like to approach it actually in two ways. The first of all is to have us each just explore briefly some of the driving trends, some of these adversity trends that are pushing on us. And then to step back from the individual trends and say, okay, what does it look like as a big picture, as a whole system? So let's see if we can do this quickly, because I know we each have a lot that we can say about this. So there are 7 that I want to look at, and the first would be climate change. And we know now that this is going to just by itself profoundly change the future of the species, that the Arctic is melting, glaciers are melting, we see changes in CO2 levels that are outside the limits that have been there for well over 2 million years. So what I see is a time of profound climate destabilization. I don't know if it's going to be warming, cooling, or whatever, but I am confident we're going to be moving into a destabilized world of climate. And that in turn is going to have profound implications for our future.
Yeah. In fact, I remember when I first started learning about climate change about 30 years ago, one of the conclusions was that we won't so much notice the warming or that. What we notice is the weather going into extremes. It would be the coldest, the hottest, the windiest, the driest, the wettest. And that's what we're beginning to see, is it's going out to the extremes.
That's right. Now, I grew up on a farm, and one of the things I noticed was that it doesn't take too much extreme weather and you've got big problems. In the springtime, if there was 2 weeks of rain in the spring and we couldn't plant our crops, we were in trouble. In the fall, if the frost came 2 weeks early, it could freeze the crops in the ground or freeze them on the vine, and we were in trouble. So it doesn't take a large change in climate to create big problems for the world.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, the projections I've been seeing, and I know there's a lot of debate about this, but the projections I've been seeing is if we keep on as we are, in 100 years' time, the planet's going to be so different. I mean, where we're sitting now is going to be desert. And the Arctics will be becoming green. It's going to be a totally different world.
It will be a different world, yes.
But one thing before we leave climate, as I say, there's a lot of debate. What about the people who say it isn't happening?
Well, now the science is so compelling that even the climate skeptics, Bjorn Lomborg, for example, and others that have been internationally recognized climate skeptics are saying, indeed, there is clear evidence that humanity is forcing change in the climate. It's really now beyond a doubt in terms of the actual science, and we'll look at the numbers themselves. If we had time here, we would look at the numbers and really dig into this.
We could do a whole couple of programs.
Yeah.
So go on, what other trends?
So the next critical trend would be energy. It would be essentially oil. And oil is such an amazing material. It takes about 11 years of manual labor to equal the amount of energy in 1 barrel of oil. 11 years of manual labor. So this is an extraordinary commodity, and about half of the available oil in the world has been pumped out. About half is gone. And the thing is, that's easy to get half. That's a cheap half to get. The second half to get is going to be a lot more difficult to get, a lot more costly to get. And at the very time that we want to get that oil, the demand for oil is skyrocketing as India, Brazil, China, and other countries begin to develop. And what we're seeing then is peak oil, the end of the age of easy oil, the growth hormone of the industrial era. And the estimates are that by 2015, these are military estimates, by 2015, we are going to see the price of oil once again begin to rise dramatically. This will have serious consequences, not only for food, but also for national security.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I mean, I think what fascinates me is that oil is implicated in nearly every single cost. I mean, our food has to be transported. The agriculture depends on oil. everything we do, there's oil involved in it in one way or another. So we move into a time of totally different economic conditions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And even simple things like commuting. I mean, I've heard, people who live, more than about 50 miles away from their work are going to find it almost too expensive to commute. I mean, there's going to be major changes, major challenges.
Yeah. Okay. So there's oil. The next major trend would be water. Another, amazingly, a scarce resource. We're a water planet, and yet we're running short of water. And what's happening is these glaciers are melting, the aquifers are being pumped dry, and the water that's actually available to grow food, for example, is dwindling. And it's estimated that in 10 years, about 40% of the people on this planet won't have access to enough water to grow their own food. So water is becoming an increasingly scarce resource. Amazing.
And then you start fighting over it. I mean, already there's in Africa where some countries are taking water out the top of the Nile, the countries further down are complaining there's no water.
Yes.
I mean, already the Colorado River is dry by the time it gets to Mexico. If Mexico were a big military nation, they might be at war with us. In the Middle East, rivers that start in Turkey and flow down through Syria and Israel, there's big problems there.
Yes.
So it's going to be as important as oil in terms of wars and military things.
Indeed. Now, I know that you have a lifetime of experience with the oceans. And part of the water problem is not simply the water on the land, it's the water in the oceans and what we are doing to the oceans. And I had the honor, the privilege to meet this woman, Sylvia Earle, who works with National Geographic. I looked at her business card. It reads Explorer in Residence for National Geographic. And she has the distinction of being the world's deepest diver. She has spent thousands of hours in the ocean. And she summarized her lifetime of experience in the oceans with the following sentence. She said, "No blue, no green. No blue, no green." She said, we're a water planet. We're a blue water planet, and the water is dying. And she said, if the water goes, so does the green, so does the earth. And she says, we're putting too much attention on the green. She says, no blue, no green. And she said, we are killing the oceans. And as a scientist, she was saying that, and she had the data to back it up. And you've had a lifetime of experience of swimming and being in the oceans.
Yeah, which is going to be another program.
Yeah.
But I think this comes back to climate change a lot. I mean, one of the things that's happening in the oceans is all the extra CO2 we're pumping out. One of the main ways that that's absorbed is the oceans absorb the CO2, which turns the oceans acidic. And that's killing the coral reefs, which is the source of a lot of life. A lot of fisheries start in the coral reefs.
That's right.
But also the plankton are being destroyed, and that's the beginning of the food chain.
The bottom of the food chain.
The bottom of the food chain.
Yeah.
You don't get the plankton turn little tiny things, they become krill. Big whales feed totally on krill.
Right.
The whole food chain gets destroyed.
Right.
But that seems to be one of the effects of climate change,
Yeah.
is where the oceans are turning acidic.
Yeah. So now we're seeing another extraordinary, unprecedented trend of the oceans themselves beginning to die, to be fished out, and so on. Next trend, population growth. In my lifetime, world population has already tripled. World population has tripled in my lifetime. If I'm fortunate enough to live another 15 years or so, world population will quadruple in my lifetime. And most of these, the people that are being born today are being born in third world countries, and they're living in these enormous megalopolises, these slums, if you will. And so here we have a world pushed to its limits already, and we're going to add probably another 2 billion or more people to the earth, many of them living in these enormous metropolitan areas where they don't have access to enough water to grow their own food.
Yeah. And even if we, came down to sort of just replacement level of, 2 children per family today, the population will still keep growing for 20, 30 years.
That's right.
Because we have more young children around today. As they grow up and become parents, they're still pushing the population.
That's right.
Pushing it up, even though we stabilize the birth rate. So it's going to
right.
take something like 40, 50 years for anything we do now to actually
stabilize.
go through this.
Given the momentum in the youth that are alive.
It's the simple mathematics of it, which people don't think. They think if we just stop reproducing now, but it wouldn't keep on, well, not stop reproducing, but stabilized it.
Right.